I'm Mike Costello, and I'd like to talk to you in the next few minutes about the wholeness principle, the importance of understanding and realizing that each one of us and all of this world are a part of a large whole, a large center of being and of life. For many, many years, we've operated with the idea that we are separate, that we're unique, and that each of us are distinct. And certainly that's true, because there is a uniqueness about each individual. But now what's happening is the realization and the understanding and the belief system of the connectiveness of all of life is coming much to the forefront of our thinking and is coming to the forefront of our realization and to the realization of our lives. Part of this has to do with communication and the fact that our planet is becoming much smaller. It wasn't very long ago that we thought of the United States as only a Christian country, and certainly there are some that still talk in that way. And then we reached a point in time where there was an acknowledgement of the Judeo-Christian ethic or presence. But today, the reality is that our spiritual ideas and our spiritual reality is connected to all kinds of traditions and belief systems that we never understood or embraced in the past. And it has to do with the fact that we are realizing that we are all part of a wonderful and magnificent whole. In our physical being, on a very physical level, we understand that we're individual persons, but that we're connected to other persons. We're connected through our relationships, through our families, and through our ties within groups of people, our cultures and races. All of these things draw us together. And so the wonderful thing that we find today is there is more understanding of the realization and importance of wholeness. And in order to be whole, we need to be complete. And we are only complete when we're united with all of those circumstances, situations, and aspects of life around us. Doctors, therapists, and spiritual leaders have had a tremendous shift in their ideas and thoughts in the last decade, and especially in the last 25 years, but certainly in a more potent way in the last 10 years. And that is that in medicine, there's an understanding of the integration of mind and body. From the standpoint of therapists, the understanding and the realization of the influence of the mind upon the body, but also the issue of spirituality and the consciousness or the dynamic of mind and how it operates and how that coming together of these different aspects makes up the whole person. Spiritual leaders are beginning to understand in a more global and magnificent way the importance of unifying the whole part of our being, where spiritual leaders were at one time only concerned about the spiritual aspect, and scientists or physicians were only concerned about the physical aspect, and therapists and psychologists and sociologists only about the mental aspect. But now we're finding that that connectiveness of those three aspects, mind, body, and spirit, are tremendously important. That has to do with the person, the wholeness of a person. But the wholeness of society and the wholeness of humanity is becoming so much more wonderfully understood today. And I think that has to do with the reality that we are shifting our consciousness. We are shifting our way of thinking about life, about the experience of it, about the world, and about the world that is beyond that which we can see. In metaphysical philosophy, we believe that we live in our minds. The dynamic of the mind connected with the body and the spirit is so very, very important. All religious traditions understand this and teach it at some level, but metaphysical practitioners and New Thought Christians embrace it wildly. And we embrace it wildly because we find that this understanding creates such a magnificent dynamic for us to come together with other people and to accept and understand the reality and the importance of wholeness. Physicians and psychologists and spiritual leaders, when they deal in the healing aspects of life, understand completely that healing depends upon new patterns. It depends upon something being introduced into the person to make it more vibrant, to make it healthier, and to manifest perfect and wonderful health. In our educational system, we strive to create in our young and in all of us who are seeking education, an unfolding of our awareness and of our understanding. But as we unfold in today's environment, we're finding that there is a wonderful reality that as we unfold more, we enfold more greatly with others. And that unifying force or that connectiveness moves us and keeps us and strengthens us as a people. Changing the behaviors of the past is a challenge that we all face. We all grew up in a different time, whether we were born 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 25 years ago, 50 years ago, or 70 years ago. And as times are changing, the patterns of our lives are changing as well. And the reality and the importance of this wholeness principle are tremendously important to us. And as we look at this wholeness principle, it's not only the wholeness of the person, of our human beings, and the wholeness of humanity and the people on this planet, but the wholeness or the connectiveness and integration between us and that which is infinite, the presence and the power of God. In these programs, we never talk to you about changing your religion or your faith tradition. We talk to you instead about concepts and ideas that are universally understood and can be applied in any environment. And so when we talk about the things we're discussing today and every week in this program, we're talking about ideas and principles that can empower and strengthen you, not ideas that require you to move away from where you are, especially in your faith tradition. But this wholeness principle is universally becoming accepted and embraced in the physical world, in the mental world, and in the spiritual world. And from it is coming a whole new dynamic of how we think about ourselves, how we think about others, how we think about this planet, and how we think about the presence and the power of God. All of that is tremendously exciting and is bringing us into a new and dynamic way of thinking. But changing those old patterns can be difficult. And so we need to open our minds and our hearts to the reality of principles such as the one that we're discussing today. It's a little bit like drawing intersecting circles. We used to think of ourselves or our family or our country or our nationality or our political persuasion or our religion as an isolated circle, a circle. We even talked about a circle of friends, and we even talk about the family as a circle. But as we draw intersecting circles, we can see on a piece of paper when we do that, that each group overlaps the other. And in the overlapping, there is such a magnificent connection that brings us to a newness of thought and a newness of being. There is tremendous diversity in this world, and the reality is that the presence and power of God, that infinite intelligence, created diversity in nature, in human life, in religion, in all aspects of our life. And so it is through the diversity that we all share that we are able to unify ourselves in a new and magnificent way. The diversity that we share as a people can bring us to a stronger, more magnificent understanding of each other and can bring us to peace in our individual minds and in our individual lives, but can bring us to a newfound peace in the physical world and in the spiritual realm. It has to do with being more inclusive than exclusive. It has to do with embracing the concept of wholeness and giving up the concept of separatism, giving up the idea that we are apart and believing instead that we are one. All of the great religions of the world have strived to create in people's hearts and minds the fact that they are unified with the presence and power of God. The problem with many religious traditions has been that the teaching has been that there is a separation from the presence and the power of God, and that something must be done in order to repair that separation. We believe that, but we believe that what must be done is that we change our way of thinking about the very fact or the very idea of this separation. That in truth we are united with the presence and the power of God, we are united with infinite intelligence, and we are united with all other persons and people, regardless of who they are, where they come from, what they do, what they think. And that this wholeness principle is the dynamic into which the entire planet is moving. Do you believe that you're a part of a whole, or do you believe that you're separate and alone? So, psychologists and sociologists tell us that as people, loneliness and isolation are the greatest difficulties that we have. And yet all of us, for the most part, except those who are totally homebound, are surrounded all the time by other people. And yet in the midst of being surrounded by other people, we are alone and we are so often lonely. The reason that we are alone and that we feel lonely and isolated is that we fail to connect with those around us, and that our consciousness fails to acknowledge and understand the reality of our connectiveness to the people around us. Divorce comes from that, relationships break, families, nations, all of us have the difficulty of isolating ourselves from others and giving up the wholeness principle that keeps us together and allows us to have the dynamic and successful lives that we want. The life into which we are all moving is one of being inclusive and not exclusive. The world into which we are moving is one of intersecting circles. The reality into which we are coming to be born in mind and thought is that in our diversity, there is a wonder and a marvel. And in the midst of our diversity, there is tolerance, there is understanding, and there is tremendous and wonderful opportunity. And in the midst of this opportunity is the opportunity for you and me and all of us to accept and understand the fact that as we're connected to each other, so we are connected to the presence and power of the divine. And that nothing we say or do, no matter what happens in our lives to us or around us, nothing can separate us from that presence, and nothing can separate us from that power. We believe in prayer and meditation as centering forces. We'd like to invite you to pause with us at this point in the program to join in a moment of quiet reflection. Eternal and loving God, we open ourselves to the reality of our wholeness with you and with all life. We are one with those around us. We are one in the midst of diversity and difference. And we open ourselves now and always to the reality of our unity one with another, to our unity in love and light and purpose. We know these things in the name of faith, in the name of hope, in the name of love. Amen.
A very wonderful talk on wholeness. And isn't it true, as you said, nothing can separate us from the power of God but our own minds?
And so often our minds do separate us, and we believe because we've been taught, or we convince ourselves because circumstances and situations present themselves, and we say, well, God can't be in the midst of this, when in fact, God is in the midst of every situation, and we really need to understand that and embrace that concept.
Yes, and when we think that God isn't with us, it's when He's with us most fully, probably. It's like that cliche about the footsteps. Mm-hmm. And Jesus said, well, that's when I carried you. Right. Well, God is with us more fully when we think He's not, when we think we're alone. But there's another factor that we think that we have to be. I used to think I had to be whole, a whole person, before, in order to be a whole person, I had to be happily married. I had to have my family all organized, which is such a fallacy, and together with many other fallacies I found in my own thinking. But that was one of the biggest, because we have to be a whole person before we can have any wholesome relationship in any way whatsoever, whether it's business, personal, whatever. We have to be whole within ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And so many of us are striving for that, but we really don't know what it is. and we're striving because of the things, some of which you just mentioned. Someone told us once that girls should get married, yes. Right? Or that everyone should get married, even that.
That should be the ideal.
That should be the ideal, that we should have families, that we should do this or we should do that, and that if we do certain things. And then we've also carried it over into our spiritual life, and we said, God will love you and reward you with heaven if you do this or you do that. And so everything then becomes conditional. It becomes conditioned upon something that we do or something that we're required to do. And in fact, that wholeness of being is something that we need to claim as the reality of our being.
Exactly.
And it's a little bit like the healing practice. And of course, we do a lot of healing in our church. We believe in spiritual healing. We also believe in the wonder and marvel of medicine.
Yeah.
But it was Myrtle Fillmore, the founderess of Unity, who said that she claimed for herself the fact that she was well, despite the fact that the doctors and she knew that she had an illness. And she said, I'm a child of God, and therefore I do not inherit sickness. So she was able to see herself as whole and well, despite the fact that she had a disease.
Yeah.
And so she claimed her wholeness in the midst of what we would consider an incompleteness of person, and yet she was able to see beyond it and to always know in her heart that she was whole. And then she did what we're talking about doing, and that's taking the next step, and she unified herself with all of those around her.
Exactly. And that reminds me of what we hear so often now, that we are indeed a spiritual person working through a physical body. And we used to think, and we used to be preached and taught, that we're a physical body with a spiritual aspect of being. But no, that is not the way it is. It's backward.
It's totally backward. The real you and the real me and the real all of us is spirit.
Right.
And that's the creation of God. It's a little bit like people trying to draw pictures of God, and I think it's fine that that's done, and it makes nice pictures. But when we're created in the likeness of God, we're created in spirit, as
Yeah.
God is spirit. And the likeness of God does not have to do with the physical humanness of our being. And so we are, in fact, spiritual beings in a physical experience, which we say so often. And that physical experience strengthens and builds, that physical experience strengthens and builds our spiritual experience, which is the reality of who and what we are. And so it's the physical aspect in the experiences of life that we came here to have so that we could learn the lessons that we needed to learn for our spirit or for our soul growth. And you know so well, and we teach in our churches and centers, that this experience that we call life is really the school of the soul. We're here to learn the lessons that we need to learn, and it's through the physical that we do that. But the spiritual connectiveness is real, and we're always connected to God.
Yeah. And if we could always remember, our primary mission in life is to grow closer to God, to grow back to God, God the whole, Creator God. And if we can remember that and know that we wouldn't need be here if we don't have to go through experiences that are uncomfortable, that are chaotic, that are weird, that are different, that are odd, that are hard to bear. Why be here if we're not going to be facing those challenges and overcoming something within ourselves?
Mm-hmm. And each one of those are opportunities for our growth.
Exactly, exactly. There's talk about the global brain. I've forgotten who coined that phrase, the words, the global brain. But I think the global brain has changed. And one of the greatest changes was when the Dalai Lama was forced to leave Tibet. And he brought to this hemisphere the wisdom and the way of life and thinking that had been so much a part of life in Tibet. And we needed to have it here, and we needed to amalgamate it into our own culture, just like the Vatican II, that Pope issued that decree. Well, that allowed the metaphysical truths or the truths of the Vatican to be shown throughout the world more fully. So there's things happening that we can see. Mm-hmm. It isn't just that we know these things are happening. Events point to it.
Right. And it's the global brain. I think we could even just take a step further and call it global consciousness.
Yes.
And the shifting of consciousness. And of course, we know totally and completely in our faith tradition the power of united consciousness or united mind, or the dynamic of united mind action. But the consciousness of the planet is changing because the collective consciousness of all of the people on it is changing. And it's changing because of just what we're talking about today, that unifying wholeness of our thoughts and our being and our spiritual nature.
Yeah.
Who would have ever thought that the Dalai Lama would have the influence that he has today? Yeah. Or who would have thought that Hindu tradition would be as globally as accepted as it is? And of course, we know about the proliferation of Christianity, mm-hmm. and so many of us in the West tout that as the solution for everything, when in fact the solution is the homogeneous realization an understanding of all of these faiths coming together. I heard someone, unfortunately, make the statement that the greatest threat to Christianity today is Buddhism and Eastern philosophy, when in fact, Buddhism and Eastern philosophy and their integration to Western thought is probably the salvation and the evolution of our spiritual understanding. And I think it's totally in alignment with what we interpret and know as Christian teachings, because our Christian teachings, New Thought Christian teachings, come from the life and teachings of Christ Jesus. And he himself demonstrated so many of the wonderful blendings of Eastern and Western philosophy in meditation, in prayer, in the dynamic of mind over matter, of spirit over matter, all of those wonderful aspects of life and truth.
Yes, and we're selling ourselves short as a people, as part of the global consciousness, if we deny that these things are not true, if we deny that they are true. Because as we accept, then we receive more. The more we accept, the more we receive. And we're open, if we're open to higher truth, if we're open to the truth you just expressed so beautifully, then we receive that which we're seeking.
Right. But from a religious standpoint, religious leaders historically have had great difficulty in acknowledging that anyone else has any ideas that are valid besides their own. And that's kind of dangerous territory. I heard someone make a comment recently that was a very spiritual person, a very knowledgeable person, and a very ingrained person in a certain faith tradition. But this person made the comment that there are only two things that I know for true, know as absolute truth. One is that God is real and he loves us, and the second thing is that we're not God. And so I think all of the other things, or so many of the other things that we think of as theology, or we think of as our religion, or we think of as our spirituality, really aren't important. They're window dressings, they're trappings of what the true core of faith is. And the true core of faith is spirituality. And the true core of religion is spirituality. It's not the church or the temple or the denomination. The core is spirituality. And spirituality speaks to that simple unity of us with the divine and how we get there and how we've come to believe that we aren't there. And one of the things that we teach so often is that we're already there. We just don't understand. And we're coming to know that. And that is a lot like the statement that you made about our purpose in coming to know God. As we come to know that relationship and we know that presence, we realize that we've always been in it and it's been in us.
Exactly. And I'd like to take a step further what you just said, that God is within us. The Father, and Jesus said that so eloquently, the Father and I are one. So we are one with God, and we are at one with God, and we are a part of God. And in my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. We sell ourselves short when we don't accept that we are that part of divine God Spirit.
And that Spirit embraces us and loves us no matter what.
Exactly.
And I think that is an important aspect of understanding the reality of the wholeness principle. God is united with us, supports us, and loves us totally and completely. And no matter what we do or fail to do, that forgiveness is always open to us. And the reality is that God's feeling about us doesn't change.
And if we can remember, too, that we're here on earth to experience whatever it is we experience, and whatever it is we're experiencing, we're supposed to. And it's how we come through that experiencing that makes the difference. Do we keep our heads, do we keep our consciousness clear? Do we stay clear in our thinking, or do we just get bogged down? And that's why we have those experiences to start with. Again, otherwise, why would we be here? So if we can remember that God doesn't punish, God is love. And whatever we're experiencing, then we're experiencing for a reason. And the more positive we can stay in our approach that the Father and I are one, then the more we can accept whatever comes and know that, well, yes, this was not by divine decree from God, by divine decree from our own higher aspect of being.
Right. And that we decide.
Exactly.
And in so many circumstances and situations, we judge.
Yes.
And we judge according to the laws,
Yes.
to the universal and spiritual laws. But the reality is that that divine presence is the same no matter what we judge, until our judgment is in alignment with that judgment, which is absolute love and acceptance.
Yes, and if we can stop looking for reasons for things, and you say this so often in your lectures that we don't need to look for reasons for why things happen. We just need to look to see, how can I live through this? What can I gain? How can I add to the other people's lives who are in the like situation? And to not look for reasons, to not, and to, it's being very, very judgmental to say that, oh, what happened to so and so that they need to have such and such thing happen in their lives. Well, how could we be more judgmental than that?
Right.
We just need to know that that person is going through this experience and they will come through victorious.
And when we judge people, all we do is create more separation.
Yeah.
And we keep ourselves from acknowledging and embracing them. And then in some ways we become kind of smug in that process. And that's very dangerous, and it's unfortunate.
Exactly. But the wholeness principle is such a beautiful thought that if we could just say as a meditation mantra, the Father and I are one, then we do feel whole that way, don't we?
We do, we do. And that Father and I are one, and we are one with each other, and that unity brings us to such a pristine and wonderful view of life and all of the circumstances and situations in life. And during this program, Dr. Freelander and I have been sharing with you concepts about the principle of wholeness and inviting you to embrace the reality that you are one with the presence of God, and that God's will for you is good and only good. We hope that you found this information useful, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
This program is a community outreach of Christ Church. Dr. Mike Costello speaks each Sunday morning at 11 a.m., and Dr. Iris Freelander speaks on Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. at the church. On Sunday evenings at 6 p.m., there is a meditation and healing service. Come and join us. You will be warmly welcomed.